My name is Maribel Crow. Most people just call me Mary. I'm 33 years old now. But the night that changed everything, the night that carved me into who I am, happened when I was only 16. It was the 4th of July. Independence Day. Fireworks cracked across the sky, red and blue flares painting the dark. Every house on the block smelled of hot dogs and burgers, every porch wrapped in flags. Inside my house, my family was gathered around the table, laughing, singing, celebrating freedom. And me? I was outside, on the porch, watching the lights explode above while my father's hand twisted the deadbolt. He had looked me square in the eyes before slamming the door, the sound of it locking clean, sharp cut deeper than any firework boom. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was a nuisance, something to shut out. People love to say the 4th of July is about liberty, about belonging. But that night, freedom lived inside my house, and I was the exile on the doorstep. They thought I would walk away, humiliated. They thought the story ended with me pressing my palm against that locked door, listening to their laughter bleed through. But they were wrong. That lock didn't end my story, it lit the fuse. And years later, when the fireworks came again, I'd be the one holding the match. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. And before I reveal how that night set everything in motion, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true revenge stories. I grew up in a house where silence was survival. Not the comfortable kind of silence like the hush of rain against windows or the stillness before sleep. No, ours was the sharp-edged silence of a family pretending everything was fine while the truth rotted beneath the wallpaper. My father, Douglas Crow, was the kind of man who lived for appearances. He ironed his shirts 3 times, polished his shoes until they shone like mirrors, and smiled so wide at church potlucks you'd think he invented happiness. To the neighborhood, he was the image of a good, God-fearing father. Inside those walls, though, he was judge, jury, and executioner. My mother, she was the ghost of the house, always drifting between kitchen and laundry room, head bent, mouth pressed thin. She'd mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. If my father was the thunder, she was the air right before the strike, thick, heavy, waiting. And then there was Ethan, my older brother, golden boy. Varsity football, honor roll, every family portrait angled toward him like he was the sun. My father adored him, my mother doted on him. And me? I was the afterthought, the shadow at the edge of every photo frame. I learned early what I was in that house, the burden. The daughter who didn't shine, who didn't carry the family name like a trophy. I remember being 8 the first time it really sank in. It was another 4th of July, actually. I'd spent hours stringing paper stars across the porch, my fingers sticky with glue, my heart stupidly full because I thought maybe, just maybe, my father would notice. When he came out and saw them, he didn't smile. He ripped them down one by one, said they looked cheap, said I'd embarrassed him in front of the neighbors. The sound of the paper tearing still echoes in me. From then on, holidays weren't celebrations. They were rehearsals for humiliation. Thanksgiving meant being sent to eat at the counter while Ethan carved the turkey at the head of the table. Christmas morning, my presents were socks or dollar store trinkets, while Ethan unwrapped shiny new gadgets. Independence Day? That became my personal theater of shame. Every year, my father found a new way to remind me I wasn't wanted, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a slammed door. I grew into a child who flinched at laughter, because in our house, laughter usually meant I was the punchline. You learn strange skills in a family like that. How to move quietly, how to disappear before the storm hits, how to carry disappointment like armor, because if you expect nothing, you can't be hurt, at least not as much. But deep down, even as a kid, I never stopped wanting something as small and dangerous as recognition. For once, I wanted to be seen, to be chosen, to have my father low on tutu. It never happened. And the absence of it, that gnawing, constant rejection cut deeper than any single insult. I was the shadow daughter, the spare, the mistake that somehow kept growing older but never growing valuable. And every year, when the fireworks cracked the sky, I swore I'd find a way to burn brighter than all of them. By the time I hit my teenage years, the wounds had already scarred over, but scars don't stop aching. They just harden. I tried everything to matter. I studied harder than Ethan, buried myself in books until my eyes burned. Straight A's, perfect essays, science fairs, where I took home ribbons no one bothered to display. For a moment, I thought maybe achievement would be the currency that bought me my father's attention. But in the Crow household, only certain kinds of achievements counted. Ethan could fumble his way through a football season and still be treated like a king. I could ace every exam, and my father would barely glance at the report card. Once, I handed him my certificate for first place in debate. He used it as a coaster under his coffee mug. That was the hierarchy. Ethan shined, I disappeared. Resentment grew in me like mold, silent, spreading, feeding on every overlooked effort. I remember one July when I was 15. I spent 2 whole days baking a pie for the holiday cookout. Blueberries, lattice crust, little sugar stars cut along the edges. I wanted it to be beautiful, something that could sit on the table and make me visible, even for a second. When I placed it down, proud but nervous, my father didn't even taste it. He lifted the dish, walked it straight to the trash can, and let it drop with a dull thud. "Presentation matters," he said flatly. "And yours looks sloppy." The humiliation boiled my skin. Everyone laughed. Ethan, my cousins, even my mother gave a tight smile like she couldn't help it. And me? I stood there with blueberry juice staining my fingers, feeling like I'd been erased. After that, the line between wanting love and craving revenge began to blur. Each year, each holiday, each dismissal added another layer to the rot inside me. I started to dream not of acceptance, but of reversal. I imagined a day when the spotlight would swing my way, not because I'd earned their approval, but because I'd ripped the illusion from their hands. My father loved the 4th of July. He'd string the biggest flags, host the loudest barbecues, brag to neighbors about our tight-knit family. The irony sickened me. He celebrated freedom in front of the world while locking me in the role of the unwanted daughter. I started writing down every slight, every cruel word, every slammed door, every time I was shoved to the sidelines while Ethan basked in applause. Pages and pages, a ledger of my family's sins against me. I stopped hoping for fairness. Instead, I studied them. How my father lied to charm neighbors. How my mother's silence made her complicit. How Ethan reveled in the pedestal he'd been handed. I learned their rhythms, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Resentment sharpened me. It taught me patience. It taught me to watch without being seen. By 16, I no longer wanted my father's praise. I wanted his downfall. I didn't say it out loud back then. I barely said anything at all. But inside, I whispered a promise every time fireworks shattered the sky. One day, I won't be the ghost outside the door. I'll be the one who sets it on fire. That's the thing about growing up in the dark. Eventually you stop fearing it. You start becoming it. I left the Crow House the summer after I turned 18. No dramatic goodbye. No slamming doors on my part. Just a duffel bag, a pocket of savings from part-time jobs, and the sour taste of relief burning in my throat. My father didn't stop me. He didn't even ask where I was going. He just said, "Don't come crawling back when it fails." It, not me. To him, I was never a person, just an experiment destined to collapse. I found a shoebox apartment 3 towns over, a space with peeling paint and a single window that stuck halfway when you tried to open it. Rent ate most of my paycheck from the diner where I worked, double shifts, balancing trays of greasy burgers and refilling coffee cups for truckers who never tipped more than a dime. It was brutal, but it was mine. I scrubbed dishes until my fingers cracked. I studied in the bathroom at night, the only place with a lock where I could focus. I took community college classes, scraping together tuition with whatever I could save. On weekends, I worked at the local library for a quieter kind of exhaustion, stacking books, inhaling dust, finding some peace between the pages. And yet, every July, the ache returned. The first Independence Day away from home, I sat on the roof of my building with a paper cup of soda and a granola bar. Fireworks exploded over the city skyline. Families gathered below, children squealing, couples kissing under the glittering sky. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt hollow. Because freedom, without belonging, is just another kind of prison. I thought of Ethan at our father's side, manning the grill, leading the family toast, absorbing all the love that had never been offered to me. I thought of the laughter spilling out of that house, the one I'd been locked out of. The bitterness coiled tighter. I tried to bury it in work, in survival. But the past has a way of showing up even in small things. When a manager at the diner scolded me for dropping a plate, I heard my father's voice in his. When classmates in a study group ignored my suggestions, I saw Ethan's smirk. When the fourth rolled around again, and fireworks split the sky, I remembered the locked door more vividly than anything else. Resentment followed me like a shadow. There were nights I wanted to run back, just to scream at them, to demand why. But then I'd picture my father's face, the satisfied curl of his lip if he saw me desperate. That vision was enough to anchor me. So I stayed away. The thing about starting over is that you learn who you are without the family script. I realized I was tougher than they'd ever believed. I could stretch $20 across a week. I could endure nights without heat, mornings without breakfast, and still walk into class with my head high. For the first time, I saw myself not as their failure, but as my own creation. Still, the hunger for recognition hadn't died. It had just mutated. I didn't crave their approval anymore. I craved the day they'd be forced to see me, not as the shadow, but as the storm. That thought lit me up during the darkest times. At the diner, when my back ached and my hands stank of grease, I whispered it to myself, "They'll see." At school, when professors praised my essays in ways my father never had, I clung to it. "They'll see." Every 4th of July, when the sky erupted in light, I told myself, "One day, the fireworks will be mine." But dreams alone don't fill the fridge. I cycled through jobs: cashier, night clerk, temp secretary. I learned to blend in, to adapt, to play polite, while quietly collecting every ounce of knowledge and skill I could. My life looked ordinary, invisible even, but inside, a fuse kept burning, slow and steady. I watched people, how they lied, how they smiled through teeth, how they built fragile little kingdoms on facades. It reminded me of home. And I realized my family wasn't unique. They were just louder about their hypocrisy. That was comforting, in a strange way. If the world was filled with masks, then one day I could rip theirs off without anyone doubting it. Still, there were moments the loneliness swallowed me whole. Nights when the silence in my apartment sounded too much like the silence of my childhood home. Thick, punishing. Nights when I longed, against my better judgment, for someone to look at me and simply say, "I see you." But no one ever did. And maybe that was the final gift my family gave me, the certainty that I'd have to create that moment myself. So I worked. I waited. I let the years harden me. And as I turned 21, 25, then 30, I kept circling back to the same thought. Freedom is meaningless without justice. Independence is hollow when you're erased. My father once told me I'd come crawling back when I failed. He was half right. I would come back, but not crawling, and not failing. I would come back with matches in hand, ready to watch his kingdom burn. Distance didn't protect me from them. Even 3 towns away, the Crow family found ways to remind me I was disposable. It started small. A letter from the university I'd been accepted to scholarship included never reached me. Weeks later, I discovered my father had accidentally withheld the paperwork that required his signature. By the time I found out, the deadline had passed. The scholarship vanished. When I confronted him over the phone, his voice was ice. "You think you deserve a free ride? Nothing in this world is free, Mari. You'll thank me later for learning that lesson now." Then he hung up. Thank him? For stealing what little chance I had? It was the first time I realized he wasn't just indifferent to me, he was invested in my failure. But it didn't stop there. A year later, Ethan showed up at the diner where I worked. He strolled in like a prince visiting peasants, all charm and swagger. He ordered coffee, barely touched it, then leaned back in the booth and smirked. Dad told me you're still, what, waiting tables? His voice dripped with mock sympathy. That night, at a family barbecue I hadn't been invited to, Ethan bragged to relatives about how he'd rescued me at my dead-end job, how he'd slipped me a big tip out of pity. The truth? He left me nothing but a few crumpled singles. It was a pattern. I built something, they tore it down. I tried to climb, they kicked the ladder. When I landed a temp job at a local firm, I thought maybe finally I'd put some distance between myself and their shadow. But somehow, my father got wind of it. Weeks later, I was called into my supervisor's office and told my position was being cut. Only later did I overhear whispers that my father had called in a favor with someone on the board, painting me as unreliable. He didn't want me succeeding. He wanted me small, invisible. Every betrayal was like a rehearsal for humiliation, just like when I was a child. And Ethan played his role perfectly. He was their golden boy still graduating college, flaunting a fiancée who looked like she'd stepped out of a catalog, sliding into a cushy job my father arranged. Every Christmas card, every Facebook post, every staged family photo was a billboard screaming, "Look at Ethan, the pride of the Crows." And in the margins I was the cautionary tale. At first, I thought maybe I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into their actions. But the evidence piled up too neatly. Scholarships gone. Jobs cut short. Rumors whispered through family networks about me being unstable, reckless, a disappointment. They didn't just forget me. They sabotaged me. And the cruelest part? No one questioned it. Neighbors, relatives, family friends, they nodded along, believing every word, because it was easier to trust the shining image of Douglas and Ethan Crow than the quiet, struggling girl they'd locked out years ago. The betrayal hardened into something sharper than resentment. It became a blueprint. If they could spin lies to erase me, then I could spin truth to erase them. So I started watching closer, listening more carefully when Ethan bragged, when my father boasted at community events, when whispers drifted through the town about money that didn't quite add up, projects that fell through, favors exchanged. Every betrayal they handed me became another brick in the case I was building against them. Still, the nights hurt. I'd sit in my apartment, bills stacked on the counter, hands trembling from exhaustion, wondering how much more I could take. But then the memory of that door slamming in my face would surface, the sound of the lock sliding shut, and suddenly my weariness hardened into resolve. If betrayal was the pattern of my life, then one day I'd break it. And when I did, the sound would be louder than fireworks. Betrayal teaches you one of two things: either to accept your place in the dirt, or to sharpen your claws while you're down there. I chose the second. By my late 20s, I'd stopped waiting for fairness. The Crow family had built their empire of lies so carefully, brick by brick, that the whole town treated them like royalty. My father, Douglas, had polished his mask into something near sainthood: chairman of the local civic board, the man who gave back to the community. Ethan was his crown jewel, handsome, ambitious, forever flashing that winning smile my father claimed was the family legacy. But perfection leaves shadows, and shadows hide cracks. I started watching not as a daughter craving love, but as an outsider studying prey. It began with whispers. A neighbor mentioned that donations from the community fundraiser never quite made it to the project. Someone else joked that Ethan's perfect engagement had ended because the fiancée caught him cheating. At first, I tucked those rumors away like scraps, uncertain of their worth. But scraps add up. I taught myself patience. If they could play long games of humiliation, then so could I. So, I collected emails accidentally forwarded to me, revealing my father's creative accounting. Bank statements Ethan carelessly left open when he borrowed my laptop during a strained visit. Screenshots of text messages between Ethan and women who weren't his girlfriend. I didn't know yet how I'd use it, but I knew I would. Every piece of evidence felt like a match slipping into my pocket. One day, I'd strike them all together. But collecting wasn't enough. I needed to be close enough to see, far enough to stay invisible. So I forced myself back into their orbit. I started attending family gatherings again, quiet, polite, the dutiful daughter who sat in the corner while Ethan soaked in attention. They were so confident in my invisibility, they forgot invisible people can see everything. At birthdays, I watched my father raise toasts about integrity and honor, while his phone buzzed with messages from contacts I knew were anything but clean. At Christmas, Ethan bragged about business deals that smelled of fraud. They thought I was sulking in silence, but I was recording dates, names, amounts. It was almost funny, in a bitter way. All those years they told me I was nothing, and now my nothingness was the perfect disguise. No one notices the ghost in the room. Still, it wasn't easy. Every time I stepped back into that house, memories clawed at me. The smell of my mother's perfume, faint but unchanged. The photo wall, where Ethan's milestones lined every frame while my childhood picture hung crooked and fading. The sound of my father's voice, commanding, dismissive, the same tone that had cut me down since I could walk. But I stayed, I endured. Because this wasn't about being welcomed anymore. It was about waiting for the right moment to strike. The 4th of July loomed larger each year. The irony of it still burned Independence Day, their favorite spectacle, their stage to perform the perfect family act. Neighbors packed our lawn. Flags draped the porch. Fireworks painted the night, while Douglas Crowe posed as the embodiment of American virtue. I knew, deep down, that would be the day. The stage was too perfect. The hypocrisy too sharp. Still, revenge requires precision. A premature strike would make me look bitter, unstable, the exact caricature they'd drawn of me all my life. I needed the timing to be flawless, undeniable. So I refined my arsenal, organized files, labeled every piece of proof, cross-checked stories. I even learned the language of accounting, contracts, public records, so when the moment came, no one could dismiss me as the jealous daughter lashing out. Years of being ignored had trained me well. I could sit in silence, smile when expected, vanish into the background while my collection grew. And in that silence, I felt something shift. For once, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the girl locked out of the house, crying while fireworks split the sky. I was the woman standing at the edge of the dark, holding a fuse that could reduce their kingdom to ash. I looked at Ethan's grin, my father's speeches, my mother's silence, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous, and that was the sweetest kind of freedom I'd ever known. The 4th of July had always belonged to the Crows, but that year it felt like the holiday itself bent to my father's will. Douglas Crowe had just been elected head of the town's civic association, and he wanted the world to see his family as the embodiment of patriotism and perfection. The house gleamed like a stage set, white clapboards scrubbed to a shine, shutters newly painted, flower beds blooming in red, white, and blue, like someone had measured the petals. Flags hung from every window, bunting twisted around porch rails, the lawn manicured so evenly it looked artificial. Rental tents filled the grass, shading long tables heavy with food platters of burgers and ribs glazed to gleam, pies lined like trophies, pitchers of lemonade dripping condensation in the heat. Douglas wanted abundance. He wanted excess. He wanted everyone's mouths too full to ask questions. By dusk, the street was clogged with cars. Families streamed toward the Crow House, men in polos, women in sundresses, children clutching sparklers, though the sky was still light. The air throbbed with laughter, cicadas, and the crackle of grills. And in the center of it all, my father. Douglas moved through the crowd like a man anointed, shaking hands, clapping backs, repeating the same jokes with practiced ease. "Glad you made it," he boomed. "We're stronger together, aren't we?" His voice rolled over the yard, smooth as oil, his eyes constantly scanning to see if the admiration was unanimous. Beside him, Ethan thrived in his role as heir. He flipped burgers at the grill, his sleeves rolled up just so, showing off tanned arms, nodding modestly when neighbors praised him. "A true Crow," they said, and Ethan's grin widened like a billboard. My mother floated through it all, wineglass in hand, tray balanced neatly, smile stretched thin but convincing. She nodded, agreed, never contradicted. The dutiful wife, the perfect partner, The silent accomplice. The image was flawless. Too flawless. And I slipped into it like a shadow. I wasn't invited. I never was. But when the whole town is welcome, no one notices an extra body. I wore a plain navy dress, hair tied back, no jewelry, nothing to draw attention. Years of being overlooked had trained me to become blur on command, a ghost in plain sight. I hovered near the lemonade table, invisible, watching. And what I saw only confirmed everything I'd always known. My father's laugh was too sharp when the mayor praised his integrity. Ethan's fiancée flinched almost imperceptibly when his hand lingered too long at her back. My mother's laugh at a neighbor's compliment cracked brittle, like glass under strain. The crowd didn't notice. They never did. To them, the crows were untouchable. The American dream made flesh, but I saw every crack. And in those cracks, I saw opportunity. The sun sank lower, gilding the lawn in gold. Children darted between chairs, sparklers spitting silver sparks. The brass section of the band struck up a march, the drums rattling against the humid air. My father stepped onto the porch, raising his arms like a general. Instantly the chatter died, as though he'd cut it with a blade. "Friends, neighbors, family," he began, his voice filling the yard with ease. "Tonight we celebrate the greatest gift our nation has given us, freedom." Applause erupted. Flags waved. Sparklers hissed. Independence. The right to live our lives with dignity, honesty, and pride. His words made my stomach twist. Dignity, honesty, pride. He wore them like armor, while filth dripped underneath. He smiled wide, basking in cheers, then went on. "I look around tonight and I see community. I see loyalty. I see the values that make this town strong. And I thank God every day for my family, for my wife, for my son." The pause was deliberate. As always, it ended there. No daughter. No Mari. Never Mari. The omission landed like a stone in my chest. The crowd clapped harder, as if rewarding his perfect phrasing. Ethan stepped forward, raising a glass, grinning wide. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of father and son as moral pillars. It was their peak performance, their masterpiece of deceit. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not grief, but calm. A cold, steady calm. For years, they had told me I was nothing. But invisibility is power if you know how to use it. No one suspects the ghost at the edge of the room. No one imagines the forgotten child could be the one holding the knife. I touched the folder in my bag, heavy with proof. Bank statements, screenshots, records meticulously labeled. Years of patience condensed into paper. My insurance, my weapon, my truth. Around me, children squealed as the first firework was prepared for launch, the crowd buzzing with anticipation, all eyes fixed on the porch. Douglas basked. Ethan gleamed. My mother floated. And the town adored. The illusion shimmered, perfect, untouchable. But I already heard the fireworks not in the sky, but in my head. The explosions of revelation, the thunder of lies tearing apart. This was their stage, but I was the fuse. And when I struck the match, their perfect image would ignite and burn until there was nothing left but ash. The first firework streaked upward, hissing against the night, and as the crowd tilted their heads to watch, I stepped forward. The explosion lit the sky in red and blue, but I wasn't looking up. I was looking at my father, his arms spread in triumph, Ethan beside him glowing like the second coming of Christ, my mother fixed in her eternal half-smile. The image was perfect, too perfect, and it was time to ruin it. I pushed through the clusters of guests, heart steady, folder heavy in my hands. Years of silence ended with the scrape of my heels against the porch steps. My father saw me first, his face freezing mid-sentence. That flicker of recognition, that flash of irritation, it was almost satisfying. He tried to recover, plastering on his politician's grin. "Ah, my daughter Maribel, so glad you could," his voice faltered, because I didn't stop at the edge like I used to. I stepped directly into the center, right beside him, where everyone could see me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother's hand trembled against her wine glass, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Ethan smirked, thinking this was some desperate bid for attention, a pathetic attempt to claw into the spotlight that had never been mine. He was wrong. I raised the folder high enough for all to notice, then spoke into the microphone my father had just been holding. "Freedom," I said, my voice sharp enough to slice through the night, "isn't about fireworks or flags. It's about truth. And tonight I think the truth deserves a turn." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable, curious. My father reached out, hand heavy on my shoulder, his whisper harsh. "Sit down, Mari. Don't embarrass yourself." I shrugged him off like ash. "Funny," I said into the mic, "that you mention embarrassment, because I've spent years carrying yours." I opened the folder, the papers whispering like knives. The first sheet I pulled out was a bank statement, projected on the small screen set up for the evening slideshow of patriotic images. I had timed it perfectly. The tech hired for the event didn't even question when I slipped him the USB earlier. The numbers blazed across the canvas. Donations collected for a town park fund, rerouted into private accounts. Gasps broke across the lawn. I held up the next proof emails with falsified signatures, invoices redirected, my father's name stamped across every page. "Douglas Crow," I said, voice cold and steady. "The man who talks of honesty and community has been stealing from the very people he claims to serve." A hush fell, thick as smoke. My father lunged for the mic, but Ethan held him back, eyes darting nervously. He could feel the crowd shifting, loyalty trembling. "Lies!" Douglas barked, his mask cracking. "She's bitter, unstable." I cut him off. "Bitter? Maybe. But unstable? Number? These records are filed with the bank, with the board, with anyone willing to look. All it takes is one phone call." The crowd turned, whispers growing. I saw suspicion spark in their faces, the cracks widening. And then, for the final strike, I turned to Ethan. "And as for the Golden Sun," I said, pulling out the photographs, the printed text messages. Ethan's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. "Loyal fiancé, devoted employee, the pride of the Crow family, except for the women who thought they mattered to you, until they saw the messages you sent at 2 a.m. Until they found out you weren't just unfaithful, you were reckless enough to do it in your father's office." The screen lit with evidence-blurred screenshots of conversations, proof undeniable. The gasps turned sharper, some laughter bitter, neighbors clutching their mouths. Ethan's fiancée paled, then bolted from the yard, her heels snapping against the pavement. The sound of her leaving was louder than the fireworks cracking above. My father tried again, desperation spilling from him. "This is slander. She's always been jealous, always been trouble." I spoke over him, my voice icy. "I was invisible to you. Nothing. A mistake you locked out on this very holiday years ago. But invisibility is power. While you smiled for cameras, I was watching. While you built your perfect image, I was collecting every fracture, every secret. And tonight, in front of the people you fooled, I'm showing them who you really are." The crowd no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked with doubt, with anger, with betrayal. Neighbors shifted away from the porch, whispers sharp, eyes cold. Someone shouted, "Is it true?" Another, "We trusted you." My father opened his mouth, but no words came out that could stitch the image back together. His face reddened, sweat shining on his forehead. Ethan stood frozen, the mask slipping, his confidence draining. My mother pressed her hand to her lips, pale, silent, as though she finally realized silence was no shield. Above us, the fireworks continued, explosions painting the sky. But no one looked up anymore. Their eyes were on me, on the folder, on the wreckage of the Crows. I lowered the mic, heart steady, not racing. Years of humiliation had led to this. Not a scream, not a fight, but truth, cold and undeniable, cutting sharper than fire. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and the perfect image of the Crow family lay shattered under the weight of reality. The silence after my words was heavier than the fireworks. For a moment, the yard seemed suspended, as though the entire town held its breath. Then the collapse began. It wasn't loud at first. It started with a ripple neighbors glancing at one another, whispers sharpening into accusations, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, asking questions they couldn't answer. My father stood frozen on the porch, jaw tight, sweat slicking his brow, the practiced mask finally slipping. For years he had commanded rooms with a smile and a clap on the back. Now he looked like a man stripped naked under a burning spotlight. The first shout came from the back of the crowd. "Is it true, Doug?" It was Mr. Halpern, the retired teacher who had donated his savings for the park project that never materialized. His voice cracked with disbelief. "You told me every cent went to the kids. Was that a lie?" Others joined in. "We trusted you. Where's the money?" The murmurs swelled into something jagged, a current of betrayal rushing toward the porch. My father tried to raise his hands, voice booming in that same practiced way, but the authority was gone. "Friends, please, this is all a misunderstanding. She's twisting things." But no one was listening. Authority once cracked never fully returns. Ethan stepped forward, trying to salvage what he could, his grin brittle, voice strained. "She's just bitter. We all know Mari has always had problems. Don't let her ruin what we've built here." His words died as the projector flicked again, showing the messages he thought he'd buried. The crowd gasped, his fiancée's voice carrying from the driveway as she shouted, "You're disgusting, Ethan," before speeding away in her car. The sound of tires screeching was like punctuation, final and damning. The neighbors turned, faces twisted, not with shock now, but with disgust. Mothers pulled their daughters closer. Men shook their heads. "Chip off the old block," someone muttered, and the bitterness of it cut deeper than any slap. Ethan's face drained, his hands twitching at his sides. The golden boy's shine evaporated in seconds. My mother clutched her wineglass so tightly it shattered in her hand, crimson liquid dripping like blood onto the porch. She didn't even flinch, just stared at the mess as though it explained everything. And still the crowd pressed forward. Reporters snapped photos. Pens scratched furiously. Phones filmed every moment, already destined for feeds and headlines. Civic leader exposed. The Crow family scandal. My father's kingdom crumbled in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried again, voice hoarse now, no longer smooth. "You all know me. You know what kind of man I am." The shouts cut him down. "We thought we did. You're a thief. You're finished, Crow." The mob's energy turned, not violent, but merciless. The adoration he had fed on for decades curdled into scorn. Each face that had once smiled at him now hardened. Each handshake he had collected was withdrawn in disgust. His power wasn't stripped by law or force, it was stripped by shame. Ethan's collapse was quieter, but just as brutal. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages he didn't dare answer. His so-called friends drifted from his side, unwilling to be associated with a sinking ship. He stood in the ruins of his reputation, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. For years, he had towered over me with that smirk, weaponized charm, dripping from every word. Now he was a boy again, cornered, exposed, raw. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling, thin. "Mari, please, stop this. You don't know what you're doing." I turned to her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. "No, Mother, I know exactly what I'm doing, what I've been forced to do because you never said a word." Her lips quivered, but no reply came. Her silence, once her shield, now condemned her as much as their lies. The party unraveled completely. Guests abandoned their plates, chairs toppled, children cried as parents dragged them away from the chaos. The carefully staged barbecue turned into wreckage, food left to rot under the summer night. The perfect celebration of freedom had curdled into an execution ground for my family's image. The fireworks continued overhead, but no one clapped anymore. The bursts of color illuminated faces twisted with disgust, tears, rage. Each explosion seemed to underline the collapse below. When the last guest left, when the lawn stood littered with paper cups and abandoned flags, only the four of us remained on the porch. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the echo of distant fireworks. My father sank into a chair, his body slumped, the fire gone from his eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Ethan stood rigid, fists clenched, chest heaving, as though still trying to summon a defense that wouldn't come. My mother knelt, wiping at the wine stains as if scrubbing away the evidence could undo it all. And me? I stood in the center, folder tucked under my arm, breathing steady. I had watched them humiliate me for years. Tonight, I had returned the gift. The collapse wasn't a scream. It wasn't an explosion. It was the slow, grinding realization that their empire was gone, their neighbors disgusted, their reputations obliterated. And the cruelest part? I hadn't even raised my voice. I had only shown the truth. Truth was always the sharpest blade. The night ended with silence, but the morning erupted with noise. By sunrise, the scandal had left our yard and spilled into every corner of town. Phones buzzed, headlines blared, feeds filled with shaky videos of me standing on that porch, folder in hand, while Douglas Crow's empire cracked. The words spread faster than any firework could travel. Civic leader exposed, Golden Son shamed, Crow family falls. For years, my father had controlled the narrative with handshakes and charm. Now the narrative belonged to everyone else. And no one was kind. Neighbors who once flocked to our barbecues avoided the house as though the paint itself were toxic. The same people who had praised Douglas as a pillar of integrity now muttered about stolen money, corruption, deceit. Mothers warned their kids not to idolize Ethan. Fathers shook their heads, calling him a disgrace. My mother's name appeared only in whispers, as though she were collateral rather than a participant, though her silence was etched into everyone's memory. It was merciless, the way admiration flipped into contempt overnight. The Civic Board issued a statement within 48 hours. Douglas Crow suspended pending investigation. By the end of the month, he was forced to resign. Donations vanished. Projects stalled. The man who had once been invited to lead parades and ceremonies found himself uninvited from even the smallest community meetings. He no longer shook hands in church. He sat at the back pew, eyes down, the congregation's stares drilling into his spine. Ethan fared no better. His fiancée never returned, her family publicly denouncing him in a letter that made the local paper. The job my father had secured for him disappeared within days. No company wanted a scandal magnet. His friends stopped answering calls. Social gatherings where he had once been the star now treated him like a cautionary tale. People laughed when his name came up, not with affection but with contempt. From golden boy to rusted ruin in a week. My mother became invisible in a different way. She rarely left the house, curtains drawn, eyes hollow. If she walked to the store, whispers followed her, accusations she couldn't answer. Her wine glass never seemed empty anymore. She lived in the ruins, moving through the house like a ghost trapped in a mausoleum, and the house itself decayed with them. The bunting and flags that had once proclaimed their pride sagged in the rain. The porch that had been a stage for speeches now creaked under silence. The lawn, once so immaculate, grew patchy and wild, weeds rising like accusations no one trimmed away. Every time I passed, I felt the irony claw at me. They had locked me out of that house on Independence Day. Now the whole town had locked them in. People used to say, "The Crows represent the best of us." Now they said, "The Crows fooled us all." The story didn't fade. It spread, picked up by regional papers, then state outlets. Local television ran segments replaying the video, anchors raising their brows as they recounted the fall of the civic leader. Some outlets framed me as the estranged daughter turned whistleblower, others as the revengeful outsider. I didn't care. Both were true. The important part was that the truth was out. There was no burying it, no charm strong enough to erase the stain. My father tried, of course. He gave one last interview, face pale but voice trying for authority, claiming he had been misunderstood, that the accusations were exaggerated. But the interviewer pressed him with the documents I'd already released. His answers stumbled, faltered, collapsed. By the end of the segment, he looked broken, not powerful. Ethan attempted silence. But silence in scandal is an admission. Every rumor, every screenshot, every whisper became gospel. He avoided public places, yet photos still surfaced him hunched at bars, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. The golden boy reduced to shadows. The Aftershocks didn't just shatter their reputations, they rewrote them. The man once remembered as a leader, now etched into history as a fraud. The son once admired as a prodigy, now mocked as a cautionary tale. The wife once pitied for her patience, now condemned for her silence. Their names, once currency, became curses. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The revenge was alive without my hand. I walked through town and saw the stares soften, not into love, not into belonging, but into recognition. People who had once ignored me now nodded, unsure of what to say. They saw me. For years I had been the invisible crow, the unwanted shadow. Now the world refused to unsee me, and that was the sharpest irony of all. In the weeks that followed, silence became my companion again, but it was a different silence than the one I had grown up with. As a child, silence had been suffocating, a cage pressed against my ribs. Now it was vast, echoing, a hollow space I had carved open myself. The crows were finished. My father no longer left the house except for mandatory hearings, each one chipping another piece off his pride. Ethan drifted like a ghost, avoiding public places, his once perfect smile buried under stubble. My mother's eyes stayed vacant, her voice a whisper when it appeared at all. Their kingdom was rubble. And me? I should have felt victorious. I had wanted this moment for so long, dreamed of it through sleepless nights and firework-lit memories of humiliation. I had envisioned the collapse, the ruin, the reversal, and yet when it came, it was quieter than I imagined. No triumphant music swelled, no crowd lifted me on their shoulders. Just the steady thud of consequences falling, one after another, until the family that had exiled me became exiles themselves. I had thought I would feel lighter. Instead, I felt hollow. Freedom was supposed to taste sweet, but the flavor that lingered was bitter, metallic, like blood on the tongue. I walked the streets, and people looked at me differently. They nodded with recognition now, sometimes even respect. But recognition is not belonging. They saw me as the woman who brought down the crows, not as a neighbor, not as a friend. I had defined myself through my revenge, and once it was complete, I wondered what was left. On the 4th of July the following year, I stood alone on a hill outside town. The sky erupted with fireworks, red and white and blue scattering across the dark. Families cheered in the distance, children squealed, lovers kissed under the bursts. And me, I watched in silence, the colors reflected in my eyes, the noise crashing above me. For the first time, no door barred me, no father locked me out, no laughter mocked me from behind glass. I was free, free of their lies, free of their power, free of needing anything from them. And yet that freedom came with isolation so sharp it nearly split me in two. Independence without belonging is just another kind of exile. I realized, standing there, that revenge is not a bridge back to love. It is a knife that severs the rope completely. I had cut myself loose from them, and there was no going back. The town would remember me as the daughter who destroyed her family, even if what I had done was only reveal the truth. Some admired me for it, others feared me, but none of them invited me in. The cost of freedom was loneliness. I thought of my younger self, that girl with blueberry stains on her fingers, pie dropped into the trash. She had dreamed of being seen, of being chosen. I had achieved something greater visibility that could never be erased, but it wasn't the kind of belonging she wanted. It was sharper, colder, untouchable. As the final firework burst overhead, showering the night in gold, I whispered to her, "We did it, but we are alone." And maybe that was the truest kind of independence. America celebrated freedom. And for the first time, so did I. But freedom, I learned, can be lonelier than any locked door. Revenge is never what you imagine. You picture victory as fire in your chest, a sweetness that fills every hollow place. But the truth? It's quieter, it's colder, it's standing alone in the aftermath, surrounded by ruins you asked for, realizing you're free but you're also untethered. My family lost everything that night, and maybe they deserve to. Lies should collapse, masks should burn, corruption should rot in the light. But when the smoke clears, what you're left with isn't triumph, it's emptiness. And maybe that's the real lesson. Freedom isn't about parades or speeches. It's not about flags or fireworks. It's about refusing to let someone else define your worth, even if that refusal leaves you standing alone. The truth can set you free, but freedom doesn't promise comfort. It promises clarity, and clarity is sharp enough to cut. So ask yourself if it were you. If your father locked you out while the world shouted about freedom, if your family erased you year after year, would you fight back? Would you wait, sharpen, gather, and finally strike? Or would you choose silence, swallow it all, and live in the shadows? There's no right answer, only the one you can live with. I chose revenge, I chose truth, and I'll live with the loneliness that followed. What would you choose? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know if you think revenge is justice or just another scar. And if you've ever carried a wound that never healed, a story that still burns in you, this channel is where you'll find others who understand. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to HLT Time. Revenge for more true revenge stories that cut deep. Because in the end, when silence breaks and secrets fall, we all have to ask ourselves, is revenge the end or just the beginning of freedom?